At this point in Beyond the Gates, Anita has just received a hopeful medical update. Madison is being pulled deeper into a lawsuit that is shaking both her personal life and her career. And the latest spoiler shows Vernon turning to Madison for advice while Naomi stands confused by everything unfolding around her. That is why the story surrounding Vernon, Anita, Madison, and Chelsea feels less like a loud crisis and more like a dangerous undertow rising inside the Dupree family. On the outside, everyone is still trying to preserve order, dignity, and control. But underneath that polished surface, each of them is already standing in front of a fear too painful to name. What makes this storyline so unsettling is not simply the possibility that Vernon may be ill. What makes it frightening is that Vernon himself seems to understand that something is no longer right. When a man like Vernon, a man who has always been the emotional pillar of his family, quietly seeks out a neurologist and still cannot bring himself to say everything out loud, that is no longer a harmless lapse of age or a passing moment of exhaustion. That is the shape of private fear settling into wounded pride. Some fears do not make people scream or collapse. Some fears make them quieter. They make them more guarded, more careful, more indirect, as if refusing to speak the truth plainly will somehow keep it from becoming real. That is exactly what Vernon feels like in this moment. He is not going to Madison simply to hear comforting words. He is going to her like a man standing in front of a dark room, aware that the answer he dreads may be waiting behind the door, yet unable to keep pretending that the door is not there. The most painful part of this story is the way it reverses the role Vernon has always played inside the family. For so long, he has been the one holding Anita up. He has been the one keeping the house steady while illness, emotional strain, and family fractures kept crashing in from every direction. But if the one growing weaker is Vernon himself, then the entire emotional structure of the Dupree family begins to shift. Once the strongest person in the room starts to tremble, nobody feels truly safe anymore. And the show is smart to place that possibility right beside Anita's fragile progress. Because the cruelest thing is not both of them collapsing at once. The cruelest thing is one of them finally reaching for hope just as the other begins slipping into darkness. That feeling is especially heartbreaking for older viewers because it reflects the truth of real family life. There are seasons when people have barely had time to celebrate one small blessing before they are forced to carry a brand new sorrow. That is why Madison becomes such a tragic figure in this arc. She is not just a doctor. She is also a woman on the verge of becoming part of this family in a deeply personal way. If Vernon is showing real neurological warning signs, she cannot respond as a detached outsider. But she also cannot react as only a fiancé or loved one. Her medical training requires caution, objectivity, and discipline. She has to separate a symptom from a momentary lapse, a real concern from an isolated incident, a pattern from a frightening coincidence. But love does not work with that kind of distance. Love rushes toward consequences. If Madison speaks too soon, she may trigger panic before there is certainty. If she stays silent too long, she may lose the trust of the people closest to her. That is what makes her dilemma so powerful. The real question is not whether Madison is smart enough to recognize a problem. The real question is whether, even if she only suspects something, she has already entered a moral territory where every choice can look like betrayal. In medicine, there are truths that cannot be casually shared. But in a family, there are silences that become just as damaging as lies. That is why Chelsea overhearing even part of the conversation feels like the moment the true tragedy begins. I really love this detail because it proves the show does not need a noisy, overblown shock to create genuine tension. In soap operas, overheard fragments almost never lead to peace. A sentence cut short, a name mentioned without explanation, a strange tone of voice, that alone is enough to plant suspicion. Chelsea is already living through a season where both her private life and her professional world feel emotionally raw. She loves Madison. She trusts Madison. But she is also part of a world where everyone seems to be hiding something. So if she catches only part of a serious conversation and does not understand the full context, it becomes painfully easy for her to believe Madison knows something devastating and is choosing not to say it. In that moment, love stops feeling like shelter. It becomes the place where hurt begins. What makes the conflict even stronger is that it does not divide neatly into right and wrong. If Chelsea lashed out at Madison, the audience will understand why. She would not just be reacting to secrecy. She would be reacting from family instinct, from pure fear. When an older loved one begins showing signs of confusion, the first response is rarely calm logic. It is panic. It is the awful question of what you missed, what you ignored, what you failed to notice because life was already so busy with work, romance, stress, and survival. That guilt is real. It makes people defensive. It makes them angry. It makes them throw their pain at the nearest person who seems closest to the truth. Madison may become the one forced to absorb all of that, not because she is the most guilty, but because she is standing nearest to the thing everyone else is too afraid to name. And yet the more I think about it, the more I believe Vernon is the deepest emotional center of this entire story. A man who has spent his life managing crises, protecting others, and carrying the dignity of the family now has to privately ask whether his own mind may be turning against him. That is not just sad. That is devastating. If the show truly is setting up a neurological decline, then the threat is not only to Vernon's memory. It is to his sense of self. Physical illness can often be named, measured, treated, and explained. But when memory begins to slip, people become afraid of themselves. They fear saying the wrong thing, remembering the wrong person, becoming a burden, or worst of all, seeing pity in the eyes of the people they love. That is why I do not think Vernon is hiding this only out of pride. I think he is trying, in the most desperate way possible, to preserve the last version of himself that still feels strong. Anita has already endured too much. If she has to turn from fighting for her own health and start worrying about him too, Vernon may feel that he has lost the final role that gave him purpose. But silence in a family like the Duprees never stays clean for long. Silence does not protect a secret. It distorts it before it breaks apart. If Vernon truly starts mixing up names, misremembering moments, or confusing timelines, then the greatest danger may not simply be that his condition becomes visible. The real danger is that an old buried truth could begin slipping out with it. That is where this story could become truly explosive. When a person loses control over memory, they also lose control over what should remain hidden and what should stay buried. A misplaced comment, a name from the past, an old memory surfacing in the wrong conversation, that alone could crack open the carefully polished image this powerful family has preserved for years. Chelsea, in that case, may be heading toward a double heartbreak. She may not only realize that her grandfather isn't well, she may also discover another truth, one nobody expected to surface this way, through the fractured memory of the very man who was supposed to keep everything locked down. That is why, to me, the biggest question in this storyline is not simply whether Vernon is sick. The bigger question is what will break the Dupree family first, illness, silence, or truth. If it were only illness, perhaps they could still hold each other and endure it together. If it were only truth, perhaps they could suffer and eventually face it honestly. But when illness becomes the force that lets truth leak out through broken memory, and silence makes everyone misunderstand each other before they ever understand the real danger, then the collapse comes in layers. Anita may find herself torn between relief over her own hopeful progress and terror at the thought that the man who has stood beside her is now quietly falling apart. Chelsea may be forced to carry both the fear of losing Vernon and the resentment of believing Madison kept her in the dark. Naomi may become the first one to sense that Vernon's mistakes are not just innocent slip-ups anymore, yet still lack enough certainty to say it aloud. And Madison may be pulled apart between professional duty and emotional loyalty, between waiting until she knows enough and trying to save trust before it is too late. That is exactly why I think the strongest direction for this storyline is not an immediate diagnosis blurted out in one dramatic scene. The stronger path is a slow accumulation of signs, each one pressing on a different fear inside a different person. Vernon fears losing control. Madison fears speaking too soon or staying silent too long. Chelsea fears that the woman she loves may no longer be standing fully beside her. Anita fears that just as she begins to glimpse light again, another storm is gathering over her family. When every person has a reason to hesitate, hide, or doubt, the tragedy does not explode like thunder, it tightens like pressure in a sealed room. It makes the audience want someone to finally tell the truth, while also understanding why no one has the courage to do it yet. If Beyond the Gates fully commits to this path, I truly believe it could become one of the saddest and strongest storylines the show is telling right now. It does not rely on loud scandal. It cuts into something much more intimate and much more familiar, the terror of watching someone you love begin to change before your eyes, and not knowing whether you still have time to save anything at all. In a world like Fairmont Crest, where people are used to hiding cracks behind elegance, status, and poise, memory may be the most frightening weakness of all. Because memory loss does not only threaten one person's identity, it can pull an entire family out of the story they have spent years telling about themselves. Everything I have shared here is only personal speculation and my own interpretation of where the story may be heading. I truly appreciate every comment, every thought, and every bit of support. Thank you so much for being here with me. And if you have not followed us yet, please scroll down and hit that subscribe button.